So I'll read the quote. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Hate multiplies hate. Violence multiplies violence. And toughness multiplies toughness in a descending spiral of destruction. Said by Martin Luther King Jr., Strength to Love, 1963. So, this book, part 2, The City of Ember, called The People of Sparks. The message. Dear people of Ember, we came down the river from the pipeworks and found the way to another place. It is green here and very big. Light comes from the sky. You must follow the instructions in this message and come on the river. Bring food with you. Come as quickly as you can. Lina Mayfleet and Doon Harrow. Part 1. Arrival. Chapter 1. What Torin Saw. Torin was out at the edge of the cabbage field that day, the day the people came. He was supposed to be fetching a couple of cabbages for Dr. Hester to use in the soup that night, but, as usual, he didn't see why he shouldn't have some fun while he was at it. So he climbed up the wind tower, which he wasn't supposed to do because, they said, he might fall or get his head sliced off by the big blades going round and round. The wind tower was 4-sided, made of boards nailed one above the next like rungs on a ladder. Torn climbed the back side of it, the side that faced the hills and not the village, so that the little group of workers hoeing the cabbage rows wouldn't see him. At the top, he turned around and sat on the flat place behind the blades, which turned slowly in the idle summer breeze. He had brought a pocket full of small stones up with him, planning on some target practice. He liked to try and hit the chickens that rummaged around between the rows of cabbages. He thought it might be fun to bounce a few pebbles off the hats of workers, too. But before he had even taken the stones from his pocket, he caught sight of something that made him stop and stare. Out beyond the cabbage field was another field, where young tomato and corn and squash plants were growing. And beyond that, the land sloped up into a grassy hillside dotted, at this time of the year, with yellow mustard flowers. Torrin saw something strange at the top of the hill, something dark. There were bits of darkness at first. For a second, he thought maybe it was deer, or several deer, black ones instead of the usual light brown. But the shape was wrong for deer, and the way these things moved was wrong too. He realized very soon that he was seeing people, a few people at first, and then more and more of them. They came up from the other side of the hill and gathered at the top and stood there a long time, or a long line of them against the sky, like a row of black teeth. There must have been 100, Torrin thought, or more than 100. In all his life, Torrin had never seen more than 3 or 4 people at a time arrive at the village from elsewhere. Almost always, the people who came were roamers, passing through with a truckload of stuff from the old towns to sell. This massing of people on the hilltop terrified him. For a moment, he couldn't move. Then his heart started up a furious pounding, and he scrambled down off the wind tower so fast that he scraped his hands on the rough boards. "Someone's coming," he shouted as he passed the workers. They looked up, startled. Torrin ran at full speed toward the low cluster of brown buildings at the far end of the field. He turned up a dirt lane, his feet raising swirls of dust, and dashed through the gate in the wall and across the courtyard and in through the open door, all the time yelling, "Someone's coming, up on the hill! Auntie Hester, someone's coming!" He found his aunt in the kitchen, and he grabbed her by the waist of her pants and cried, "Come and see, there's people on the hill!" His voice was so shrill and urgent and loud that his aunt dropped the spoon into the pot of soup she'd been stirring and hurried after him. By the time they got outside, others from the village were leaving their houses too and looking towards the hillside. The people were coming down. Over the crest of the hill they came, and kept coming, dozens of them, more and more, like a mudslide. The people of the village crowded into the streets. "Get Mary Waters," someone called. "Where's Ben and Wilmer? Find them. Tell them to get out here." Torrin was less frightened now that he was surrounded by the townspeople. I saw them first, he said to Hattie Carranza, who happened to be hurrying along next to him. I was the one who told the news. Is that right? Said Hattie. We won't let them do anything bad to us, said Torrin. If they do, we'll do something worse to them, won't we? But she just glanced down at him with a vague frown and didn't answer. The three village leaders, Mary Waters, Ben Barlow, and Wilmer Dent, had joined the crowd by now and were leading the way across the cabbage field. Torn kept close behind them. The strangers were getting nearer, and he wanted to hear what they would say. He could see that they were terrible-looking people. Their clothes were all wrong, coats and sweaters, though the weather was warm, and not nice coats and sweaters, but raggedy ones, patched, unraveling, faded, and grimy. They carried bundles, all of them, sacks made of what looked like tablecloths or blankets, gathered up and tied with string around the neck. They moved clumsily and slowly, some of them tripping on the uneven ground, and had to be helped up by others. In the center of the field, where the smell of new cabbages and fresh dirt and chicken manure was strong, those at the front of the crowd of strangers met the village leaders. Mary Waters stepped to the front, and the villagers crowded up behind her. Torrin, being small, wriggled between people until he had a good view. He stared at the ragged people. Where were their leaders? Facing Mary were a girl and a boy who looked only a little older than he was himself. Next to them was a bald man, and next to him was a sharp-eyed woman holding a small child. Maybe she was the leader. But when Mary stepped forward and said, "Who are you?" it was the boy who answered. He spoke in a clear, loud voice that surprised Torrin, who had expected a pitiful voice from someone so bedraggled. "We come from the City of Ember," the boy said. "We left there because our city was dying. We need help." Mary, Ben, and Wilmer exchanged glances. Mary frowned. "The City of Ember? Where's that? We've never heard of it." The boy gestured back the way they had come, to the east. "That way," he said. "It's under the ground." The frowns deepened. "Tell us the truth," said Ben. "Not childish nonsense." This time the girl spoke up. She had long, snarled hair with bits of grass caught in it. "It isn't a lie," she said. "Really. Our city was underground. We didn't know it until we came out." Ben snorted impatiently, folding his arms across his chest. "Who's in charge here?" He looked at the bald man. "Is it you?" The bald man shook his head and gestured toward the boy and the girl. "They're as in charge as anyone," he said. "The mayor of our city is no longer with us. These young people are speaking the truth. We have come out of a city built underground." The people around him all nodded and murmured, "Yes, it's true." "My name is Doon Harrow," said the boy, "and this is Lina Mayfleet. We found the way out of Ember." He thinks he's pretty great, thought Torrin, hearing a note of pride in the boy's voice. He didn't look so great. His hair was shaggy, and he was wearing an old jacket that was coming apart at the seams and grimy at the cuffs, but his eyes shone out confidently from under his dark eyebrows. "We're hungry," said the boy, "and thirsty. Will you help us?" Mary, Ben, and Wilmer stood silent for a moment. Then Mary took Ben and Wilmer by the arms and led them aside a few steps. They whispered to each other, glanced up at the great swarm of strangers, frowned, whispered some more. While he waited to hear what they'd say, Torn studied the people who said they came from underground. It might be true. They did in fact look as if they had crawled up from a hole. Most of them were scrawny and pale, like the sprouts you see when you lift up a board that's been lying on the ground, feeble things that have tried to grow in the dark. They huddled together, looking frightened. They looked exhausted, too. Many of them had sat down on the ground now, and some had their heads in the laps of others. The three village leaders turned again to the crowd of strangers. "How many of you are there?" Mary Waters asked. "About 400, said the boy, Doon. Mary's dark eyebrows jumped upward. 400? In Torrin's whole village, there were only 322. He swept his gaze out over this vast horde. They filled half the cabbage field and were still coming over the hill, like a swarm of ants. The girl with the ratty hair stepped forward and raised a hand, as if she were in school. "Excuse me, Madam Mayor," she said. Torrin snickered. Madam Mayor. Nobody called Mary Waters Madam Mayor. They just called her Mary. Madam Mayor, said the girl, my little sister is very sick. She pointed to the baby being held by the sharp-eyed woman. It did look sick. Its eyes were half closed, and its mouth hung open. Some others of us are sick too, the girl went on, or hurt. Lottie Hoover tripped and hurt her ankle, and Nammy Proggs is exhausted from walking so far. She's nearly 80 years old. Is there a doctor in your town? Is there a place where sick people can lie down and be taken care of? Mary turned to Ben and Wilmer again, and they spoke to each other in low voices. Torn could catch only a few words of what they said. Too many. But human kindness. Maybe take a few in. Ben rubbed his beard and scowled. Wilmer kept glancing at the sick baby. After a few minutes, they nodded to each other. Mary said, All right, hoist me up. Ben and Wilmer bent down and grasped Mary's legs. With a grunt, they lifted her so that she was high enough to see out over the crowd. She raised both her arms and cried in a voice that came from the depths of deep in her chest. People from Ember, welcome. We will do what we can to help you. Please follow us. Ben and Wilmer set her down, and the three of them turned and walked out of the cabbage field and toward the road that entered the village. Led by the boy and the girl, the crowd of shabby people followed. Torrin dashed ahead, ran down the lane, and got up onto the low wall that bordered his house. From there, he watched the people from underground go by. They were strangely silent. Why weren't they jabbering to each other? But they seemed too tired to speak or too stupid. They stared at everything, wide-eyed and drop-jawed, as if they had never seen a house before, or a tree or a chicken. In fact, the chickens seemed to frighten them. They shrank back when they saw them, making startled sounds. It took a long time for the whole raggedy crowd to pass Torrin's house, and when the last people had gone by, he jumped down off the wall and followed them. They were being led, he knew, to the town center, down by the river, where there would be water for them to drink. After that, what would happen? What would they eat? Where would they sleep? Not in my room, he thought. End of chapter 1. Ooh, I don't remember this book as well as The City of Ember, but I do remember it being good. And so now they have met new people, both groups. It's almost like the others, like each group is the other, you know? And so the people that have been here have, now new people to start just in their lives all of a sudden. It's doubled. Their numbers have doubled. This new kid is so sassy. He really is. He really is. And it's funny because, if you picture yourself as this kid, semi-normal, growing in a town that has, trees and grass, and then all of a sudden these people from underground just come and, don't know anything. I don't know how I would feel as a child being I think I would be interested, though. I think I would, question the people and, want to know how they did everything. He's like, why aren't they talking? They must be stupid. I know. I wonder how old he is. If they said that Lina and Doon looked a little bit older than him and they're 12, he must be 10 or younger. So he's got to be a small child. Coco, hello. Happy Monday. Enjoy your lurk. I hope things are going well. I think my book light is running out of charge, which is very unfortunate because it's dying. Aw, that's so sad because I kind of needed it today because it's a little darker in here. Just because I have something behind me, but maybe I can just adjust. I will just adjust. There we go. Hopefully you can still hear me okay. I'll just have to look to the side once I'm done, which I guess is good because then maybe I won't see chat pop up. I know I need to charge it. Luckily it's rechargeable. It's not battery operated or anything. So that's really nice. But yeah, hello, Coco. We're about to start chapter 2, so get ready. I'm going to take a little drink, little hydration drink. So far, my arms are doing okay. Ow. As I bump my arm on the desk. Okay, here we go. Chapter 2, Out from Below. The people from the dying city of Ember had come up into the new world only a few days before. The first to arrive had been Lina Mayfleet and Doon Harrow, bringing Lina's little sister Poppy with them. From a ledge high up in the great cave that held their city, they'd thrown down a message, hoping someone would find it and lead the others out. Then they'd waited. At first, they'd explored the wonders around them, but as the hours passed, they began to worry that their message had not been found and that they would be alone in this world forever. Then, in the late afternoon of the next day, Doon suddenly shouted, "Look, they're coming!" Lina grabbed Poppy by the hand. All three of them ran toward the mouth of the cave. Who was it? Who was it coming from home? A woman emerged from the darkness first, and then 2 men, and then 3 children, all of them squinting against the bright light. "Hello, hello," Lina called, leaping up the hill. She saw who it was when she got closer, the family who ran the Calais Street vegetable market. She didn't know any of them well, she couldn't even remember their names, and yet she was so glad to see them that tears sprang to her eyes. She flung her arms around each one in turn, crying, "Here you are! Look! Isn't it wonderful? Oh, I'm so glad you're here. And are more coming?" The new arrivals were too breathless and amazed to answer, but it didn't matter, because Lina could see for herself. They came out from the cave, shading their eyes with their hands. They came in bunches, a few of them, and then minutes later a few more, stumbling out into a light 1,000 times brighter than any had ever seen. They stared in astonishment, walking a few steps, and then just stood, dropping the sacks and bundles they carried, gazing, blinking. To Lina and Doon, who felt ready, like they already belonged here, the refugees from Ember looked strange in this bright landscape of green grass and blue sky. They were so drab and dingy in their heavy mud-colored clothes, their coats and sweaters in colors like stone and dust and murky water. It was as if they had brought some of Ember's darkness with them. Doon suddenly leapt away, shouting, "Father! Father!" He threw himself against his stunned father, who fell backward, sat down on the ground, and burst into a combination of laughter and weeping to see his son again. "You are here," he gasped. "I wasn't sure. I didn't know." All afternoon they came. Lizzie Biscoe came, and others from the old high school class, along with Clary Lane from the greenhouses, and the doctor who had helped Lina's granny, and Sadge Merrill, who had tried to go out into the unknown regions. Mrs. Murdo came, walking in her brisk, business-like way, but giving a cry of joy when she saw Lina hurtling toward her. People came whose faces Lina recognized, but whose names she didn't remember, like the shoe repair man from Livery Street, and the little puffy-faced woman who lived in Silverton Square, and the tall, black-haired boy with blue-gray eyes so light they looked like glints of metal. What was that tall boy's name? She spent a second trying to recall it, but only a second. It didn't matter. These were her people, the people of Ember. All of them were tired, and all of them were thirsty. Lina showed them the little stream, and they splashed the water on their faces and filled their bottles there. "What about the mayor?" Lina asked Mrs. Murdo, but she just shook her head. "He's not with us," she said. Some of the older people looked terrified to be in such a huge place, a place that seemed to go on without borders in all directions. After they had stared nervously about them for a while, they sat down in the grass, hunched over, and put their heads to their knees. But the children ran around in ecstasy, touching everything, smelling the air, splashing their feet in the stream. By evening, 417 people had arrived. Doon kept track. As the light began to fade from the sky, they shared the food they had brought, and then, using their coats as blankets and their bundles as pillows, They lay down on the warm, rough ground and slept. The next morning, they got ready to leave. Lina and Doon, when they first arrived, had spotted a narrow gray line that ran along the ground like a pencil stroke in the distance. They thought it might be a road, so the people of Ember, having no other clue about where to go, picked up their bundles and set out in that direction, a long, straggling line trailing across the hills. It was on this walk that Mrs. Murdo told Lina and Doon about leaving Ember. The three of them walked together, Mrs. Murdo with Poppy in her arms. Doon's father walked behind them, leaning forward now and then to hear what Mrs. Murdo was saying. "I was the one who found your message," Mrs. Murdo said. "It fell right at my feet. It was the day after the singing. I was on my way home from the market, feeling sick with worry because you and Poppy had disappeared. Then there was your message." She paused and looked up at the sky. She was keeping a couple of tears from falling, Lina saw. Mrs. Murdo composed herself and went on. "I thought it would be best to tell the mayor first. I wasn't sure I trusted him, but he was the one who could most easily organize the leaving. I showed him your message, and then I waited to hear the city clock ringing out the signal for a meeting." Mrs. Murdo paused to catch her breath. They were going uphill over rough clumps of earth, hard walking for city people whose feet were accustomed to pavement. "And was there a meeting?" Lina asked. "No," said Mrs. Murdo. She plucked some burrs off her skirt and shifted Poppy to her other shoulder. "Mercy," she said, "it's terribly hot." She stood still for a moment, breathing hard. "So there was no meeting?" Lina prompted. Mrs. Murdo started walking again. "Nothing happened at all," she said. "The clock didn't chime. The guards didn't come out and start organizing people. Nothing. But the lights kept flickering on and off. It seemed to me that there was no time to lose. So I went to the pipeworks and showed your message to Lister Monk. We followed the directions and we found the rock marked with an E right away, because people were there already." "But how could they be if they didn't have the directions?" Doon said. "Who was it?" "It was the mayor," said Mrs. Murdo grimly, "and 4 of his guards. Looper was there too, that boy who used to keep company with your friend Lizzie. They had huge, bulging sacks with them, piled up on the edge of the river, and they were loading the sacks into boats. The mayor was shouting at them to work faster. Lister yelled, 'What are you doing?' But we didn't need an answer. I could see what they were doing. They were going first. The mayor was making sure that he would get out, along with his friends and his loot, before anyone else." Mrs. Murdo stopped talking. She trudged along, wiping sweat from her forehead. She frowned up at the hot, bright sky. Poppy whimpered. "Let me care the child for a while," Mrs. Murdo said, Doon's father. "Thank you," Mrs. Murdo said. She stopped and passed the squirming Poppy to Doon's father, and they walked on. Lina waited a minute or so, and then she couldn't wait any longer. "Well, what happened?" she said. "It was awful," Mrs. Murdo said. "Everything happened at once. 2 of the guards looked up at us and lost their balance and fell into the water. They grabbed hold of the loaded boats, which made the boats tip and dump their load into the river. The other guards and Looper knelt down and tried to reach them, but they were pulled in too. In the midst of all this, the mayor jumped onto the one boat that was still upright, but as soon as he hit it, it turned over and he plunged into the river." Mrs. Murdo shuddered. "He screamed, children. It was a horrible sound. He bobbed in the water like a giant cork, and then he went under. In just a few seconds, he and his guards were swept away. They were gone." They walked in silence for a while, going downhill now. After a few minutes, Mrs. Murdo went on. "So, Lister and I went back up to the city, and we had the timekeeper ring the bell for a public meeting. We tried to explain what to do, but as soon as people heard the first bit, that a way out of Ember had been found, and that it was in the pipeworks, everyone began shouting and rushing around. Things turned into a terrible mess. People were in too much of a hurry even to ask questions. Hundreds of them poured through the streets of the city all at once, and outside the door of the pipeworks, a huge crowd pushed and shoved to get in. So many people, so panicky, that some were trampled and crushed. Oh, cried Lina, how horrible. These were people she knew. It was too awful to think about. Horrible indeed, said Mrs. Murdo. She frowned out across the vast landscape surrounding them, where there were no people in sight at all. It was impossible to control them, she went on. They rushed to the stairway. Some people lost their footing and fell all the way down the stairs. Others ran right over them. And then when they realized that they were going to have to get into those little shells and float on the river, some people were so frightened that they turned around and tried to go up the stairs again. And some were so eager to get going that they jumped into the boats and capsized them and fell into the river and were drowned. She raised her eyes to Lina's. I saw everything that happened, she said. I'll never forget it. Lina looked behind her at the citizens of Ember toiling across the hills. These were the ones who had made it out. How many do you think were left behind? She asked Mrs. Murdo. Mrs. Murdo just shook her head. I don't know, she said. Too many. And have the lights gone out forever now? I don't know that either. But if they haven't, they will soon. Hot as she was, Lina shuddered. She and Doon exchanged a look. They were thinking the same thing, she was sure. Their city was lost in darkness now, and anyone left there was lost too. Later that day, the refugees from Ember came to the road that they had seen from afar. It was potholed and weed-cracked, but easier to walk on than the rough ground. It led alongside a creek that flowed swiftly over round, smooth rocks. In all directions, they saw nothing but endless expanses of grass. They shared the food they had brought with them, but it wasn't much. Some of them soon grew weak with hunger. They grew faint from the heat, too, which was hard to bear for people who used to the constant chill of Ember. Poppy cried when she was set down on her feet, and her face looked flushed and hot. Night came in this strange, gradual way, so different from the sudden lights out that signaled night in Ember. The travelers lay down on the ground and slept. They walked the next day too, and the day after that. But then the food that they had brought with them was gone. They traveled more and more slowly, stopping often to rest. Poppy was listless. Her eyes were dull. Finally, around the middle of the following day, they trudged up another hill, and from there they saw a sight that made many of them weep with relief. Farmed fields lay below them in a wide valley, and beyond the fields, where the stream they'd followed joined a river, was a cluster of low brown buildings. It was a place where people lived. Like the others, Lina was glad to see it, but it wasn't a bit like the city that she had imagined, the one she'd drawn pictures of back in Ember, the one she'd hoped to find in this new world. The buildings of that city had been tall and majestic and sparkling with light. That city must be somewhere else, she thought as she started down the hill. She'd find it. Not today, but someday. End of chapter 2. Twitch is coming with the ads like every 15 minutes. I see that, and I'm not sure why. Let me see. Let me see if my ad settings are still the same, because I've noticed that they're coming like very frequently, and I'm just like, yeah, no, they're still scheduled how I've always had them. So Twitch is apparently being, greedy today. Apparently, because my settings are still once an hour. But, it's fine, Twitch. Okay. But I hope everybody who's listening is enjoying their Monday. All the lurkers out there, not calling you out, just saying hello. And I hope you're enjoying the reading as well. And all my YouTube watchers, happy whatever day it is when you're watching this. Twitch is like, I'm going to take this opportunity to try to sell you a car. I know, I see the things that's like, oh, ad is going off. I'm like, what the heck? Like, I haven't been live that long. Okay, Twitch. Twitch is like, gotta make up for all the September discounts. Who knows? Who knows? Oh, I'm getting sleepy. For real, yeah. I like September's over. Oh my goodness. Also, I completely forgot to mention, but I did post in Discord yesterday that all month long I'm having a channel point redemption of where you can suggest what emote you'd like to see on my channel in the future. It'll most likely be another flurry emote, so feel free to use your suggestions. You can do one per stream, so make sure that you make your suggestions count. I did post a couple ideas that we've had in the past for emotes in Discord. So if you can't think of anything, maybe look at those for inspiration. But I do have an emote slot available, and I want to really think about what people as viewers, as subs, would actually want and use on my channel. So I figured I would ask the people who would actually use them, what do you want to see? What kind of emote would you like to use that's on my channel? So let me know if you would like. And then the most popular ones will be involved in some way in my oh my Cardinal. That one is so scary. Thank you for that alert. But yeah, so the most popular or winner emotes will be somehow involved in my streamiversary that's coming up next month. Actually, I need to post about it in Discord. It's going to be on November 4th, so mark your calendars, save the date. My 4 years will be on the 4th, so that is why the emote vote channel redemption is 400 points, because it's 4 years on the 4th. So I was looking away and that came out of nowhere. I was too, Summer. I was too. Matthew, hello. Happy Monday. Welcome in. How are you doing? No, but I even picked spooky alerts that I knew would scare me. So that one is actually perfect because it literally, there's no warning. There's no warning. I'm doing good. How are you? I'm doing pretty good. I'm having a good Monday. So I'm glad you are too. Oh, again, I'm trying to move my arms around. I got some jabby jabs from some vaccinations before stream today. So they're a little sore, but I'm using all preparations I can to help with that. So we'll see. We'll see. Okay. And now I think we're ready for chapter 3. Chapter 3, Through the Village. The woman who had greeted them led the people of Ember into the town. They went down a dusty street, past buildings that looked as if they'd been made out of the same brown earth that was underfoot. They were heavy-looking, imperfect buildings. Their walls were fat and lumpy, rounded smooth at the corners. Lina saw cracks in the walls and crumbled places where bits of window ledge or a step had fallen away. Paths and alleys and strips of garden wound between the houses. It was clear that no one had planned this place, not the way that the builders had planned Ember. This town must have grown, one bit added to the next and another bit added to that. Plants grew everywhere. In Ember, the only plants were in the greenhouses, unless you counted mold and fungus, which grew on the trash heaps and sometimes in kitchens and bathrooms. Here, flowers and vegetables grew beside every house. Plants sprung up alongside the streets, climbed walls, crawled over fences, pushed up through cracks in the stairways, tumbled out of big pots and over windowsills, and even down from roofs. There were animals, too. Huge, amazing, terrifying animals. In a fenced-in place at the edge of town, Lina saw 4 brown animals much bigger than she was, with squarish heads and long, tasseled tails. Farther on, tethered to a post in front of a house, was a yellow-eyed creature with 2 spikes poking out of its head. When she walked by, it suddenly said, "Ma!" and she skittered away in fright. She turned to look for Doon, who had fallen a little behind. She found him stooping over, peering at some yellow flowers growing next to a wall. "Look at this," he said, when she came up beside him. He pointed to a flower's tube-shaped center. "There's a spider in there, the exact same yellow as the flower." There was. Only Doon would notice such a thing. Tugging at the sleeve of his jacket, she said, "Come on, stay with us." And she hurried him up toward the front of the line to join his father and Mrs. Murdo and Poppy. These 4 people, Poppy and Mrs. Murdo, Doon and his father, were Lina's family now, and she wanted them close around her. Only Poppy was related to her, but Mrs. Murdo was like a mother. She had taken Lina and Poppy into her house when their granny had died, and she would have kept them with her if they hadn't had to leave the city. Doon's father was part of her family just because he was Doon's father. And Doon himself, he was the one who had been Lina's partner in finding the way out of Ember. There was a tie between the 2 of them that had never been broken. And never could be broken. On they walked, down one street and up another, around curves and down through narrow passages. Everywhere, people stared at them. Some leaned from open windows. Some sat up on roofs, their legs dangling over the side. Some stood still in the midst of work they'd been doing, their shovels or brooms in their hands. These people were taller and browner than the people of Ember. Were they friendly? Lina couldn't tell. A few children waved and giggled. After a while, the refugees came out from the narrow streets into a wide open area. This must be like Ember's Harkin Square, Lina thought, a place in the center of town where people gather. It wasn't a square, though. It was more like a rough half-circle, paved in dusty brown brick. "What is this place called?" Lina asked. Mary Waters, who was walking just ahead of her. "The Plaza," Mary said. Plaza. Lina had never heard that word before. It was her first New World word. On one side of the plaza was the river. On the other side were stalls with thatched roofs and small buildings with display racks out in front holding faded-looking clothes, shoes with thick black soles, candles, brooms, pots of honey and jam, along with plenty of things that Lina didn't recognize. A bigger building stood at the plaza's far end. It had wide steps in front, a double door, and a tower with windows up high that looked out over the plaza. Next to it was a tremendous plant of some kind, a great pole much higher than the building, with branches like graceful down-sweeping arms and leaves like bristles. "What is that?" Lina asked a woman who was standing at the edge of the plaza, watching them go by. The woman looked startled. "That's our town hall," she said. "No, I mean the big plant next to it." "Big plant? The pine tree?" "Pine tree," said Lina. "I've never seen a pine tree." Her second word. Pine tree. The woman gave her an odd look. Lina thanked her and walked on. "Step this way, please," said Mary, who was trying to keep the unruly refugees in order. "There's plenty of water for you here, both in the river and in the fountain." She pointed to the middle of the plaza, where there was a pool of water circled by a low wall. The water in the middle of the pool jumped up into a column of bubble and spray that splashed down and jumped up again constantly. The people of Ember surged forward. Dozens ran to the edge of the river and bent down to bathe their faces with water. Dozens more crowded around the pool. Children splashed their hands in it, crawled up on the rim, and tried to reach the leaping water in the middle. Some of the children jumped in and had to be taken and hauled out by their parents. People at the rear of the crowd pushed forward, but people at the front weren't ready to be pushed. Suddenly, there was yelling and jostling, and water sloshing out onto the pavement. Lina slipped and fell down, and someone tripped over her and fell too. "Please," shouted Mary, her deep, loud voice rising above the uproar. "Order! Order!" shouted a man's voice. Lina heard other voices too as she struggled to her feet, the voices of the villagers crowding in at the edge of the plaza. "Get back, Tommy! Get away from them!" "Where did you say they came from? Under the ground?" "Are they people like us, Mama?" a child said, "or some other kind?" "Of course we're like you," thought Lina. "Aren't we? Are there more kinds of people than one?" She got to her feet and wrung out the hem of her sweater, which was sopping wet. She spotted Mrs. Murdo on the other side of the plaza and headed toward her. The commotion finally subsided. The people of Ember, their thirst quenched, gazed about them in wonder. Everything was strange and fascinating to them. They stood with their heads craned back, gazing at the towering plants and the peeping creatures that flitted in around them. They stood down to touch the bright flowers. They peered in doorways and windows. Children ran down the grassy bank to the river, tore off their shoes and socks, and dunked their feet in the water. Old people, exhausted from their long walk, lay down behind bushes and went to sleep. The 3 town leaders began moving among the people of their village, talking with them in low voices for a minute or so, then nodding and moving on. Lina saw these townspeople glance at the new arrivals with worried looks. They didn't seem to know what to say. Lina could understand why. What would the mayor of Ember have done, for instance, if 400 people suddenly arrived from the unknown regions? By this time, the sky was beginning to darken. A few townspeople started calling the refugees together. "Come this way. Call your children. Please sit down." They stood at the edges of the crowd with their arms stretched out and nudged people inward until finally all 400 people were squeezed into the plaza, gathered around the wide steps in front of the town hall where the 3 leaders were standing. Mary Waters raised her arms above her head and stood that way without speaking for several seconds. She looked powerful, Lina thought, even though she was very short. The way she stood, with her feet planted slightly apart and her back straight, made her seem almost to be growing out of the ground. Her black hair was streaked with gray, but her face was smooth and strong-boned. Gradually, people fell silent and turned their attention to her. "Greetings," she cried. "My name is Mary Waters. This is Ben Barlow." She pointed to one of the men standing next to her, a wiry man with a stiff, gray box-like beard jutting from his chin. He had 2 wrinkles, like the number 11, between his eyebrows. "And this is Wilmer Dent," she said, pointing to the other man. He was tall and thin, with wispy, rust-colored hair. He smiled a wavering smile and waggled a few fingers in greeting. "We are the 3 leaders of this village, which is called Sparks. 322 people live here. I understand that you come from a city 3 days' walks away. I must say, this is a surprise to us. We have not been aware of any post-disaster settlements nearby, much less a city." "What does post-disaster mean?" Lina whispered to Doon. "I don't know," Doon said. Mary Waters cleared her throat with a gruff sound and took a breath. "We will do our best for you tonight, and then tomorrow we will talk about your plans. Some of our households are willing to take in a few of you for the night, those with young children and those who are old or ill. The rest of you may sleep here in the plaza. Those who go with the householders will share in their evening meal. Those who stay here will be given bread and fruit." There was a scattering of applause from the people of Ember. "Thank you," several voices cried out. "Thank you so much." "What's bread?" Lina whispered to Doon. He shrugged his shoulders. "With all those who need shelter for the night, please stand." "Will all those," Mary Waters called. "As I said, those with children and the elderly and ill." A rustle swept through the crowd as people got to their feet. Voices murmured, "Stand up, Father. You go, Willa." "No, I'm all right. You go." "Let Arno go. He sprained his foot." Because of Poppy, Lina and Mrs. Murdo stood up. Doon remained sitting, and so did his father. The bright yellow ball in the sky was traveling downward now, and the shadows grew longer. Night was coming, and with the gathering darkness, Lina's spirits grew darker too. She thought of the green and blue bedroom she'd moved into back at Mrs. Murdo's house in Ember, the lovely room she had been so glad to have. She was homesick for it. Right now, she would have been happy to have a bowl of turnip soup and then crawl between the covers of that bed in that room with Poppy next to her and Mrs. Murdo out in the living room tidying up and the great clock of Ember about to strike 9, the hour when the lights went out. She knew that this place, the village of Sparks, was alive and that Ember was dead, and she would not want to go back there even if she could. But right now, as the air grew chilly and whispered against her skin, and a strange bed and in a stranger's house waited for her, she longed for what was familiar. Mary Waters was calling out names. At each name, someone from the village stepped up and said how many people that household could take. "Leah Parsons?" A tall woman in a black dress came forward. "2 people," she said, and Mary Waters pointed at an old couple at the front of the crowd of refugees who picked up their bags and followed the tall woman. "Randolph Bonito?" called Mary, and a big red-faced man said, 5. The Kendrick family, with their 3 small children, went with him. "Evers Mills?" 4. "Lanny McMorris?" 2. "Jane Garcia?" 3. It went on for a long time. The sky grew darker and the air cooler. Lina shivered. She untied her sweater from around her waist and put it on. Light and warmth must go together here, she thought. Warm in the day, when the bright light was in the sky, and cool at night. In Ember, the lights made no heat at all, and the temperature was always the same. At the edges of the plaza, someone was raising a flame-tipped stick and lighting lanterns that hung from the eaves of buildings. They glowed deep yellow and red. Mary was pointing at Mrs. Murdo now. "You, ma'am," she said. "Your child looks the sickest of anyone. We'll send you home with our doctor." She beckoned to a woman standing nearby, a tall, bony, old woman with bushy gray hair, chopped off just below her ears. She was wearing loose pants of faded blue and a rumpled tan shirt that was buttoned crookedly, so one side hung lower than the other. "Dr. Hester will take you," Mary said. "Dr. Hester Crane." Lina stood up. She turned to Doon. "Will you be all right here?" she said. It made her uneasy to be separated from Doon and his father. "We'll be fine," Doon said. "No need to worry," said his father, spreading a blanket on the ground. The doctor stooped down to look at Poppy, who drowsed in Mrs. Murdo's arms. She put a hand on Poppy's forehead, a big, knuckly hand with veins like blue yarn. She pulled down the underside of Poppy's eye. She said. "Yes, well, come along. I'll do what I can for her." Lina cast an anxious glance at Doon. "Come and find us in the morning," Doon said. "We'll be all right here." "This way," said the doctor. "Oh, wait." She scanned the mostly empty plaza. "Torin," she called. Lina heard the slap of footsteps on brick and saw a boy running toward them out in the darkness. "We're going home now," the doctor said to him. "These people are coming with us." The boy was younger than Lina. He had a strangely narrow face, as if someone had put a hand on either side of his head and pushed hard. His eyes were round blue dots. Above his high forehead, his light brown hair stood up in an untidy tuft. He glared sideways at Lina and said nothing. The doctor headed up the road beside the river, walking with a long stride, her hands in her pockets and her head bent forward as if she were looking for something on the ground. Staying close beside Mrs. Murdo, who was carrying the sleeping Poppy, Lina followed. The chilly evening air crept in through the threads of her sweater, and an insect hovering near her ear made a high, needle-like whine. The homesick feeling swelled so big inside her that she had to cross her arms tightly and clench her teeth to keep it from coming out. End of chapter 3. Bites, hello, happy Monday. Enjoy your lurk. Car, welcome in. Happy Monday. How's it going? How is everything going? I think we're going to read one more chapter today. Welcome in. How are you all doing? Happy Monday. I'm finally home. Let's go. I hope work ended well. We're going to read one more chapter today. Because I can feel myself getting a little tired. I'm doing okay. Glad to be here. I'm glad you're here too. So welcome in. And I will just mention again that we have a new channel point redemption. So if you would like to use it, please do, to help vote for an emote that you would like to see on my channel in the future. I did post about it in Discord yesterday. And because my stream anniversary is coming up and I do have an open slot, so a new emote would be really, really fun. And I would like to know what people, who watch my channel would want to see. So very exciting. And I can't wait to see what people suggest. So yeah, because I would love to have a new emote. It's time for a new one. So I want to get ideas bouncing around. Because that would be really, really exciting. So please think about it. You can only do one per stream. So use your channel points wisely and let me know what you want to see. I'm going to take one more drink. We'll read chapter 4 and then we will raid out. And we also still have our ongoing follower goal. So if we get to 500 followers, I will start a merch store, which is also very exciting. So lots of fun stuff. Elmo fire meme, but flurry. I will have to write that down and look that up because I have no idea what that meme is. I'm not hip on the memes, but I am going to write that down. Okay. So, oh, I think I know what you're talking about. Okay, so Elmo meme, but flurry. Okay, and then Car would like to see a rage one. Okay. Also noted. Grace, hello. Welcome in. Happy Monday, Grace. How are you doing? Happy freaking Monday. Sorry if I'm in and out. Oh my gosh, no worries at all. No worries at all. These book reading streams are very cozy, lurky. So they're perfect for people who just want to listen and lurk. I just got home. Heck yes. Did you have to work today? Did work go well? I'm full of rage. Oh my gosh. Same. It's always inside. It doesn't come out very often, but it it can come out for sure. Rage would be fun. And I know Coco's is like a manifestation, which we do on this channel all the time. So great suggestions. Great suggestions. It has been a Monday. Love children gaslighting me. Oh my gosh. And lying when I watch them do something. Ugh. I hate when anybody does that. Not even just kids, but anybody. It's the worst. Unfortunately, I went to work. Oh, I had work today too. And then I went and got a couple vaccines. So my arms are a little sore. So in between the chapters, I've been trying to kind of move them around to get the circulation going. I took some ibuprofen, drank some water, so trying to make them as least sore as possible, so that I'm not like in so much pain. We also have a bunch of new spooky sound alerts. So both Channel Point and for Bits, they're in the Twitch sound alerts extension. So make sure to go check those out. They're really, really fun. You reminded me to get my flu shot. You feeling okay now? Definitely okay. Did you get the COVID booster? I got the booster and my flu shot both at the same time, one in each arm. So both my arms are a little sore. I
love you.
Oh, Car, thank you for the bits. So that one, they're not the regular bits. They're the Twitch sound alert ones. So I didn't know how to like specifically say that in the whatchamacalled, in the little command. But I hoped I got that across. They're in the Twitch sound alerts extension. So you have to choose that specifically. I need to get my booster. Yeah, I just got it. And actually, between both arms, the oh my
and shivers down your spine. Shrieking skulls will shock your soul, seal your doom tonight.
Oh my god, I need to turn those down. I need to turn those down. I'm on my phone. Oh. Yeah, those, I know the extensions are really hard to do on the phone. I wanted to switch out my regular alerts too, but it's more of a process. So I was just like, that one was a little, I know, I need to turn them down. I wrote myself a note to turn them down after stream. My neighbors say the volume's fine. Cordal. Yes, I will turn them down after stream. But I love the pop-up thing with the kitty. Me too. Do you love it? I just changed that. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, that one is so creepy. But don't you love the kitty? Yes, I like that they're loud, but I think they're just slightly too loud. Because I do want them to be like jump scary and kind of loud, but not like ear deafening loud. So I will definitely turn them down. But I thought the black cat was absolutely perfect. It's like Luna, it's Halloween, it's spooky, so I think it's amazing. I love it. So I hope you guys love it too. And I really wanted to do both bits and channel points so that, you know, anyone could do whichever. So loud's good. I hate ears anyway. I definitely, like, my ears are going so bad. My hearing is going. I used to have like such sensitive ears, and now I'm just like, turn it up because I can't hear anything. I'm like that old person. I'm gonna be that old person for sure. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Spooky sound, loud alerts, they're fun. They're a good time. All right, one last drink, and then we'll do chapter 4. Today has been so fun so far, though. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and listening to my book readings. It makes me so happy that people just, you know, want to sit and lurk and hang out while I read. Because I would probably be doing this anyway. Even if I wasn't streaming, I'd probably be reading. So I appreciate you guys wanting to hang out with me while I do that. My ears are so muffled right now because of sinus congestion, so I cannot hear. Oh my gosh, that's awful. Sinus anything is the worst. Like, I hate sinus headaches. The way it makes your like nose feel, they're terrible. I'm so sorry that you have to deal with that right now. I'm sure it's because of like the changing seasons and all that. The trees are starting to turn color out here, which is my absolute favorite part of fall. Oh my god, Cornel! Thank you for the scream bits. So there's one of the bit ones. Thank you for the example. Oh my gosh, I love spooky sounds. I love them so much. So much. I was listening to a different audiobook today up until like 15 minutes before stream. Oh my gosh, so you're all about it today. You're all about the book listening. Like if I'm chewing, I really can't tell what people are saying. Oh my gosh, Grace, I'm like that anyway. Whenever I'm like watching TV and eating a snack, I have to turn the volume up because my chewing, the crunches are always louder. So I have to pay attention and turn it up. The girls, wait a minute. I told the girls to tell me if the kids were too loud at lunch because I couldn't tell. Oh no. That's awesome. Yeah, so there's the regular bits. There's the regular bits. So hopefully, I don't know, hopefully if you guys think there's like a better way to kind of differentiate the two, please let me know, but hopefully that will help. But otherwise, get ready for the last chapter today. We're only going to read 4 chapters today. Because I feel like it. So and I would like to relax a little bit after stream. So, here we go. Chapter 4, The Doctor's House. The sky had turned a deep blue now, almost black. At one edge shone a streak of brilliant crimson. In the houses of the village, one window and then another began to glow with a flickering yellow light. They walked and walked. Each time they came to a doorway or a gate in a wall or stairs leading upward, Lina hoped this might be the house. Back in Ember, where she'd had the job of messenger, she'd been a tireless runner. Running was her greatest joy. Tonight, it was hard just to walk. She was so tired, her feet felt like bricks. But Dr. Hester walked on, with the boy trotting ahead of her sometimes, and sometimes lagging back to stare at Lina and Mrs. Murdo and Poppy until they came to an outer edge of the village. There, standing somewhat apart, was a low-roofed house. Except for a glimmer of light on its 2 windows, reflected from the reddening sky, it was darkness, huddled beneath a great brooding plant the shape of a huge mushroom. "Is that a pine tree?" Lina asked the doctor. "Oak tree," the doctor said. So Lina understood that tree must mean all big plants, and they came in different kinds. A path led to a wooden gate, which the doctor opened. They came into a shadowy, leaf-littered courtyard paved with uneven bricks. On 3 sides were the 3 wings of the house, like a square cornered U. The eaves of the roof sloped down to form a walkway all around. In the failing light, Lina could see just that the courtyard was crowded with plants, some growing in the ground and some in pots of all sizes. Vines wound up the columns of the walkway and crawled along the edge of the roof. "Come inside," the doctor said. She led the way to a door in the central part of the house. She and the boy went in. Lina stopped just inside the doorway, and Mrs. Murdo came up behind her, Poppy in her arms. They stood peering into the gloom. There was an odd pungent smell, like mushrooms or leaf mold, only sharper. The doctor disappeared for a moment, and when she came back, she held a lit candle. She moved around the room, lighting more, 2 candles, 3 candles, 4, until a wavery light filled the central part of the room. The corners remained in darkness. Come in, the doctor said impatiently. Lina moved forward. She felt grit beneath the soles of her shoes and the tickle of dust in her nose. She was in a long, low room with clutter everywhere. Clothes draped over the backs of armchairs, a shoe on a saggy couch, a plate with some bits of food on it sitting on the windowsill. At one end of the room were 2 doors, both of them closed. At the back, a stairway rose into a dark square hole in the ceiling. At the other end of the room, in the corner, was an open doorway, leading, Lina guessed, to the kitchen. Beside this doorway was a kind of hollow in the wall, framed by stones and containing some sticks and scraps of paper. The doctor stooped down before this hollow place and held her candle to the sticks and paper there. In a moment, a flame leapt up. It was a bigger flame than Lina had ever seen, like a terrible orange hand, reaching up and out. Lina's heart knocked hard against her ribs. She stepped backward, bumping into Mrs. Murdo. They stood staring, Mrs. Murdo with a hand clutching Lina's shoulder. The doctor turned around and saw them. "What's the matter?" she said. Lina couldn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on the flames, which leapt higher and crackled. Mrs. Murdo tried to answer. It's... She inclined her head toward the end of the room, where the first flame had become a dozen flames, licking upward, sending out flashes of orange light. "Oh," said the doctor, "the fire. You're not used to fire?" Mrs. Murdo managed to smile apologetically. Lina just stared. "It stays in the fireplace," the doctor said. "Not at all dangerous." In Ember, there was never fire unless there was danger. Someone's electric wiring had frayed and ignited, or a pot holder had fallen on a stove's electric burner. The only fire Lina had seen that wasn't dangerous was the tiny flame of a candle. This fire scared her. In the window glass, reflections glimmered. The windows were set so deeply into the walls that there was a ledge at the bottom, wide enough to sit on. The boy, Torin, hiked himself up on one of these ledges and sat there, kicking his feet against the cabinet set in the wall below it. "Afraid of fire," he said in a low, scornful voice. "Come in," the doctor said. "You can sit over there if you'd like." She pointed to some chairs at the other end of the room, far from the fire, so that was where Lina and Mrs. Murdo sat. Poppy woke up enough to give a weak wail, and then she slumped into Mrs. Murdo's lap. "This will likely be the last fire of the season anyway," said the doctor. "Nights will be getting warmer soon. We won't need one." A creak sounded from outside, and then rapid footsteps. Someone pounded on the door. Lina clutched Mrs. Murdo's hand. But the doctor only sighed and moved to answer the knock. "Oh, it's you, William," she said. "What do you need?" "Some of that ointment," said a man's voice. "I need it right now. My wife cut her hand. It's bleeding all over." Come in, I'll get it," the doctor said, and she went into another room and rummaged around while the man stood shyly just inside the door, looking out around the corners of his eyes at Lina and Mrs. Murdo. The doctor brought him his jar of ointment, and he went away. No more than 10 minutes later, another knock came, this time from a young woman who wanted some willow bark medicine for her sister, who had a pounding headache. Again, the doctor rattled around in the other room. She came out with a small bottle, and the woman hurried off with it. "Are you the only doctor here?" Mrs. Murdo inquired. "Yes," said Dr. Hester. "I have a never-ending job." She suddenly looked worried. "Did I give William the right jar?" Yes, the one on the third shelf. I'm sure I did." She gave a frazzled sigh. "Now, let's tend to your little girl. Put her down here." She patted the couch that stood against the wall. And wrap her in this, she retrieved a knitted blanket that had fallen on the floor, gave it a shake, and handed it to Mrs. Murdo. "I'll give her a swallow of medicine." Poppy accepted 2 spoonfuls of medicine. It was something reddish that Dr. Hester poured from a jar, and she spit out the third, whimpering. Lina's heart ached to see Poppy so sick. Most of the time, Poppy was a ball of energy, so quick and curious you never knew what she would do next. She might chew up a valuable document, for instance, or trot off on an exploration of her own at the exactly wrong moment. Now she was limp and pale, like a little sprout that hadn't been watered. Mrs. Murdo laid her on the bed. Lina sat by her and stroked her hair, and quite soon she went to sleep. The doctor disappeared into the kitchen, and Torrin climbed the stairs and vanished into the room above. All at once, Lina was overcome with tiredness. The disorderly house, the unfriendly boy, the fire, all of it was strange and disturbing. And Poppy was terribly sick, which worried Lina so much that she felt a little sick herself. She sat down by Mrs. Murdo and laid her head on Mrs. Murdo's lap. She was vaguely aware of clattering and chopping noises coming from the kitchen, and then she dozed off into a confusing dream of lights and shadows. "Dinner!" shouted Torrin. Lina bolted upright, and he laughed. Have you heard of food? He said. Have you heard of eating? They sat at the table, all of them but Poppy, and the doctor ladled out something from a big bowl. Lina wasn't sure what it was. Cold potatoes, she thought, and something else. She ate it because she was hungry, but when she had eaten, she suddenly became so tired again that she could hardly move. Quite tasty, said Mrs. Murdo. Thank you. Well, said the doctor, certainly. You're welcome. She started to stand up, then sat down again, looking flustered. Maybe you'd like to read or walk around or... We're a bit tired, said Mrs. Murdo. Perhaps we could go to bed. Dr. Hester's face brightened. Bed, yes, she said, standing up. Of course. Why didn't I? Let's see. Where will we put you? She looked around, as if an extra bed might be hidden in the mess. The loft, I suppose. No, cried Torrin, that's my room. It's the only place with 2 beds, said Dr. Hester, picking up a candle. She made her way through the clutter to the stairway. They'll touch my things and Casper's things, cried Torrin. Don't be silly, said Dr. Hester, starting up the stairs. But where will I sleep? Torrin wailed. In the medicine room, said Dr. Hester. Tears had appeared in Torrin's eyes, but the doctor didn't notice. She disappeared into the loft, and for a few minutes Lina heard thumps and scrapes from above. Come on up, the doctor called. Lina climbed the stairs, and Mrs. Murdo came after, carrying Poppy. By the light of the doctor's candle, Lina saw 2 beds under a sloping ceiling. There was a chest at the foot of each bed. Some clothes hung from hooks, and some boxes were neatly lined up on the sill on one of the windows. 2 beds, but 3 of you, said the doctor, frowning. We could put the baby... It's all right, Lina said. She'll sleep with me. And a few moments later, she was in bed, Poppy in the crook of her arm, covers drawn over them. Good night, Mrs. Murdo said from the other bed, and the candle was blown out and the room went dark. But not as dark as the rooms in Ember at night. Lina could still see a faint gray rectangle where the window was, because of the lights in the sky, the silver circle, and the bright pinpoints. What are they called, she wondered. And who is Casper? And how can the doctor stand to have that huge, awful fire right there on the floor of her house? Everything here was the opposite of Ember. Ember was dark and cold. This place was bright and hot. Ember was orderly. This place was disorderly. In Ember, everything was familiar to her. Here, everything was strange. Will I learn to like it here, she wondered? Will I ever feel at home? She held Poppy tight against her and listened to her snuffly breathing for a long time before she fell asleep. End of chapter 4.